Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 218 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Our guest today is Adam Nimoy. He's directed dozens of TV episodes, including science fiction shows like The Outer Limits and Star Trek The Next Generation. He teaches film production and directing at the New York Film Academy, and he's also the author of the book My Incredibly Wonderful Miserable Life, an anti-memoir, which chronicles his recovery from substance abuse. And we'll be speaking with him today about his new documentary For the Love of Spock, a moving tribute to his father, Star Trek actor Leonard Nimoy. And now, here's our interview with Adam Nimoy. All right, so we're here with Adam Nimoy. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, and so your new film is called For the Love of Spock. So just tell us a bit about how this came about.
Well, in November of 2014, I approached my dad with the idea of making a Spock documentary. My dad and I had worked on a little documentary about his life growing up in Boston during the Depression, and it was such a great bonding experience. I thought we should kind of do it again. And I was very much aware of the upcoming anniversary of Star Trek, the original series, the 50-year anniversary, and I thought that we should do something to help celebrate that event, 50 years of Spock. And when I suggested this to my dad, he immediately was supportive of the idea, and we went to work on it.
Yeah, I've heard you say that the original concept was going to be very Spock-centric, and it kind of developed as you worked on it.
Yeah, I mean, it was going to be specifically a Spock doc. I mean, my dad made it very clear that this was not, he was a man of great humility. He didn't need to blow his own horn. It was not the Leonard Nimoy show. It was really going to be just about the inception, creation of Spock, the evolution of the character, and why Spock has had so much impact for so many years all over the world. And it was very specific about Spock and not about the career of Leonard Nimoy. But after my dad passed away, there was such an outpouring of emotion from everywhere, social media and print media and people contacting me that, and people kind of like mourning the loss, not only of Spock, but of Leonard the artist and Renaissance man, that it became clear we needed to expand the film to include his life and legacy as well.
Yeah. And I mean, one thing, speaking of his life, that really jumps out at me in this movie is just how many challenges he faced in becoming an actor.
Well, yeah, this is a guy who, left home from Boston at age 18. I mean, he told his parents he wanted to become an actor. It's like telling them he wanted to run off and join the circus. They were appalled. His parents were Russian immigrants, and their idea of the American dream was to have their children go to professional school and practice a profession. His older brother went to MIT and was a chemical engineer for Johnson & Johnson for 30 years. But my dad was not suited for that at all. He was not academically inclined. He barely made it through high school. So, it took a lot for him to decide to really leave home and travel a 3-day train trip across country to find his calling in Hollywood.
Right, and he said that before Star Trek, he worked for 15 years as an actor in Hollywood and never had a job that lasted more than 2 weeks. Yeah.
It was more like it was 17 years really before they started in production on the original series in '66. He arrived in '49, and a lot of small roles. I mean, if you look up the Internet Movie Database, you can see all the dozens of TV appearances that he made. A lot of stage work and a lot of odd jobs, really, to keep things going during that time. He had married my mother in '55, and my sister arrived then, and then I came in '56. So a guy who had a family of 4 to support and pursue an acting career. So, and he was a guy who was very ambitious and a hard worker, and he did a lot of odd jobs to make ends meet.
Right, and it was a wide variety of odd jobs, too, and lots of different, he was skilled in lots of different areas.
Yeah, like naturally so. I mean, it's still uncanny to me how he managed to know how to do all this. I mean, he was building furniture for our home. I mean, where did he learn these things? I don't even know. And the real odd thing to me was he had an incredible mind for numbers and business. I mean, his business manager said that my dad was probably the only client who really understood what he was doing in terms of all the investment strategy. And I took a lot of business courses in law school, but my dad, he knew all this stuff. He could crunch numbers in his head. I think it was just because he was a good businessman as a kid, earning and doing all these odd jobs. He had a very fine mind for a guy with so little education.
Yeah, and selling vacuum cleaners door to door and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, the vacuum cleaners is how he really pulled together the heavy money he needed to get to pay his tuition at the Pasadena Playhouse before he came out in '49. So he did that in Boston. He was working in a card shop. He sold newspapers in the Boston Common. He was folding chairs at the Boston Pops. I mean, this guy did everything. When he was in L.A., he was selling freezers and working in pet shops and setting up fish tanks and driving a cab, and he scooped ice cream. I mean, he managed an apartment. He did everything. This guy there's nothing that he couldn't do or that was beneath him. And it was admirable, frankly, because he had no safety net when he got to L.A.
Yeah. Okay, and so then he finally gets his big break. He's cast in Star Trek, but then for a while things look very uncertain even with that.
Well, yeah, I mean, my dad had this philosophy, and we talk about it in the film For the Love of Spock, about the fact that he knew a lot of people, colleagues who worked in Hollywood, got on a series and started spending, up to the extent of their income without saving anything. And he didn't want to be that kind of a guy. He was a very frugal guy, and he did a lot of odd jobs on the weekends. He was all over the country, appearing at state fairs, and then during the week he was in Star Trek all week. And we lived a fairly, modest lifestyle because he was very concerned that Star Trek would come and go, and he would be back on the street, trying to hustle his next gig. And so he was very conservative in that respect.
Yeah, and so they cast him in the pilot, and then the studio didn't like the pilot, and they basically wanted to replace the entire cast, and Gene Roddenberry really fought to keep him in the show. Yeah,
they wanted to replace the entire cast, especially the guy with the pointed ears, because it was... NBC at that time was a network of family fare, really. It was Sing Along with Mitch and the Bob Hope comedy special and Andy Williams specials. I mean, they were a very family-oriented type of network, but they were also in last place at that time, and they were looking for something, more interesting and edgy to try to get a grip on the competition. So they took a chance on Star Trek, but when they saw Spock, I mean, he looked devilish to them and frightened them. They were worried they were going to alienate their family values audience. So they asked Gene to remove him, which he refused to do.
Yeah, there's actually a guy in your film who says he went to the show and he looked around at the props and the pointy ears and stuff and told Leonard, "Man, you got to get off this show. This is going to kill your career." Yeah,
that was my dad's. That was Barry Newman, an actor and also raised in the West End of Boston during the Depression, and a very close friend of my dad's. And Barry was nervous for him. He thought he was shocked when he saw, because he went out on the set to visit him. He was shocked about what Dad looked like, and he was worried it was going to be, laughable, frankly. And and Star Trek could have been laughable. I mean, it really is very far-fetched. But the actors were so good, were so convicted to those roles that they had. They were so convincing, that they made it real, and the rest is history. I mean, there is a lot of camp to Star Trek. There's no doubt about it. There's a lot of winking eyes and tongue-in-cheek material in the show, which is great. But there's also some very, very serious drama, and I think that's what had the impact on the audience.
Right. Well, I mean, like William Shatner tells this story that he cracked a joke during one of Leonard Nimoy's performances, and Leonard just was furious because he took his acting so seriously and he took the character so seriously.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you read Bill's book on my dad, Leonard, 50 years of their relationship, he talks a lot about the fact that, Bill, when the camera stopped rolling, Bill was liked to have a good time. He was a practical joker and he liked to fool around. And Dad, was much more serious about the role because he just felt like it was very difficult for him to jump in and out of it, to be walking around the set waiting for a setup, waiting for the scene to start, and be joking around and one-upping Bill, and then just try to get back into Spock because Spock is so demanding in terms of the discipline of the character, the type of character that he was playing. So sometimes they clashed occasionally for that reason, yeah.
Well, right, and William Shatner in that book, he says that some aspects of Leonard came through in Spock. He cites his intellect and his sort of reserved personality, and also his political views. He says are all a little bit reminiscent of Spock.
Yeah, I'm not sure how the political views fit into that, but definitely there was a lot of. I mean, these guys meld. You know, talk about mind meld. These guys melded together. Spock was perfect for Dad because. As my father told me not long before he passed away, he reminded me that Spock was the quintessential outsider because he's the only alien on the bridge of the Enterprise. Of that core crew, he's really the outsider, the epitome, and he felt that way as a young man growing up, you know, a young teenager in Boston, because they lived in a very defined neighborhood of immigrants, Italians, Irish, and Russian Jews primarily, and my dad always wanted to get, you know, kind of transcend that and get himself out of there and find a way to integrate himself with American society, American culture, which is why he left at 18 on his own. And, you know, that kind of personal experience that he had, he really brought to the Spock character because he told me that's what the Spock was all about, how to integrate himself, how to become a part of the crew, how to give the best that he had to offer for the benefit of the whole. And so they really kind of led parallel lives.
Mm-hmm. I guess what I'm thinking of in terms of the politics is that your dad was a big supporter of the peace movement, and that seems a very Spock-like thing to do.
Well, live long and prosper. I would assume that, you know, that's the underpinnings of peace. That is true. My parents were very politically active in the 60s, and in fact, my father campaigned. He was flying his private plane campaigning 35 states for George McGovern, the peace candidate, in 1972. Yeah, my parents were both very active. We were at demonstrations against the war in Vietnam at UCLA, I remember, and a number of other locations. So, yeah, you know, that would seem to fit in with Spock's ideology. Yeah.
And then I think your dad also, he played a big role in forming Spock's personality, right? That there wasn't a whole lot about the character on the page when they started, and he sort of contributed a lot to that character.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's an evolution, and we really kind of go into that in the film, in the documentary on Spock. I mean, he is the brainchild of Gene Roddenberry. There's no doubt about that. We have to really give, you know, Gene the credit and the due that he you know, greatly deserves, because again, Gene fought to keep the character in the show, and Gene fought to have the pointed ears on that character. But the fact that Spock was half human was also written into the character for him to try to deal with it, which created a lot of internal tension between his Vulcan logical side and his human, more emotional side. But there were a number of instances during the course of production of that first season where either directors gave Dad notes to help him develop that character, or Dad brought in other experiences that he had. We talk about the effect of Harry Belafonte and how he performed on Spock's character, and these other little characteristics of Spock. The Vulcan salute is Dad's, and the Vulcan neck nerve pinch is also Dad's. So it's really a combination of factors. But yes, there's a lot of Leonard, a lot of himself. He took Spock very seriously and was always thinking of new creative ways to expand on the character.
Well, do you want to just say a little bit more about Harry Belafonte and the salute and the nerve pinch, how those came about?
Well, the Belafonte thing, he talks about again in the documentary, the fact that when he saw Harry at the Greek Theater in Los Angeles in the mid-'60s, that Harry would come out and just start singing without a whole lot of theatrics. He's not moving his body. But when he did move his body at very dramatic moments in the song, it really resounded with the audience. And the audience started to really react to that, which taught him that if you were minimal, if you maintain a minimal presence, then when you do actually something that is more theatrical with your body, with your person, then it has a much more profound effect. And he talks about that in terms of the eyebrow as an example. That's where he kind of came up with the idea. The eyebrow is very, very substantial commentary without having to say anything. The nerve pinch was something he came up with when the script was written that Spock hits the evil Kirk. Kirk is somehow has divided himself into good and evil, and Spock has to knock out the evil Kirk, and he was supposed to do it with the butt of a phaser. And that's when he thought that he should come up with something more creative, and hence the Nerf bench.
Yeah. And the salute, too, was drawn from his childhood, right?
Right. Salute is straight out of the Orthodox synagogue in the West End of Boston, and it is a part of the gesture that the chief priest rabbis make during Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish New Year, in blessing the congregation. They do it with both hands under their prayer shawls, because you're not supposed to see it. It's so powerful. And they extend their hands out and they make that gesture with their fingers. And Dad was intrigued by that, fascinated by that. It was something that always interested him. It stuck with him. And he thought it might be an interesting gesture to use for Vulcans to greet each other. And the rest is history.
I mean, one line that really jumps out at me in the film is Walter Koenig says something like, 1,000 actors could have played our parts, the rest of the crew, but only Leonard Nimoy could play Spock.
Well, yeah, that may be true. Spock was offered to other actors. The network and studio insisted that Gene offer it to actors who were more established than my dad at the time, and apparently was offered to Marty Landau, who was on Mission Impossible at the same time. He turned it down because there was not enough stuff going on with the role, and DeForest Kelley, who was definitely a major established actor at that time, he turned it down for the similar reason. So my dad wanted, Gene wanted my dad from the start because they had worked together in a previous TV episode, and Gene just liked the performance that Dad gave, but he liked the way he looked. Dad had just the physical appearance. His thin, gaunt, kind of high cheekbone look was something that Gene was going for. But the other thing is that, there was just a lot about Dad, I think, in his nature. We talked about his reserved kind of nature. He could, very thoughtful and introspective, that seemed to be really suited for what Spock was all about. And he just seemed to really step into that. It was a very good fit from the very beginning. But as I say, a lot of what came of Spock was really something that evolved over time.
Yeah. Okay, so take us back in time. So when Star Trek first comes out, just what was it like in your house? The show was suddenly on TV.
No, we went crazy. It was nuts. We loved it. We were so excited. My sister and I were TV fanatic. We were just watching TV every night. I wasn't doing any homework. I'm telling you, I wasn't practicing clarinet. I was watching stuff and watching similar fare. I mean, I was a, Lost in Space fanatic and Outer Limits and these kind of shows, and very much aware. We were old enough to be very aware of what this meant. I'm very excited about the prospect of Star Trek coming out, and we were waiting, anticipating, because they started production in May. The show didn't air until September. So we were waiting for that big premiere evening. And then when the show very quickly became popular, it was just a very exciting time in our household. A lot of activity, a lot of attention, the press, the photographers, the fan mail, as we talk about in the documentary. I mean, these were all, it was a very exciting time for us.
I mean, there's this really funny shot. It's this sort of outtake where you come out in your Spock years, sort of surprise your dad. Yeah,
this is one of the many attempts to get Leonard to loosen up and crack up. Get him out of his Spock demeanor. Was that they're shooting a scene where Spock is in the captain's chair and Kirk is on the planet below, and during the course of his conversation with the captain, they're rehearsing the scene, and somebody pulled me off the set and took me to makeup. And I was sitting for Fred Phillips, who did my dad's makeup every day. And Fred cut my hair and did my, the pointed, the sideburns, and put a pair of ears on me, shaved my eyebrows. And they had me come out of the turbo lift and kiss my dad hello. And he lost his Spock composure for a couple of minutes. The whole crew and it's all dark out there, but the crew was just laughing hysterically. You can't see them because the set is lit and everybody behind the camera's in black, but they were there and they fully enjoyed the joke.
And then William Shatner, in his book, he talks about how he sort of thought he was going to be the star of the show, that he was the hero and he had lead billing and all this stuff. But then very quickly, the audience seemed to fixate on Spock and be fascinated by Spock. Yeah,
George Takei comments on that as well in our film. apparently that is kind of the way things went down. I mean, it is, Bill was a very established actor, a very talented guy, clearly, and brought so much to the role. Brought a lot to the role that really helped Dad stay introspective with Spock. He talks about this quite a bit, that Bill's, panache and very, kind of aggressive romantic take on Kirk, which is incredible. I love Kirk. We love Kirk, but it helped Dad stay within the confines of what he wanted to do with Spock. So the pair was, Spock really needed Kirk and McCoy for that matter to really develop their characters. It really is a group effort in that respect. But yeah, Spock was different. Spock was cool. Spock was interesting. People were into Spock, and there was a lot of reaction to Spock, surprising the network. In fact, the network, started saying, the network was like, we always loved Spock, we always wanted Spock, and we want more Spock stories now. Why aren't you doing more Spock stories? We love this guy. We've always loved this guy. When they're trying to get rid of him from day one. So that I think was a lot for Bill to deal with, but they had a lot of camaraderie and a lot of competition. I think it helped the show. There was a lot of one-upmanship. I think it helped the show. You look on screen, the chemistry is all there between the two of them, between the three of them. I think we're really lucky that those particular individuals, if only Leonard Nimoy could play Spock, I think only Bill Shatner could have played Kirk, because we had Jeff Hunter beforehand, and Jeff is an excellent actor. I'm a big fan of his, but he was very introspective, and it was a very different take on the characters. So I think we all benefited in the end.
Yeah. Okay, and so especially since the title of this documentary is For the Love of Spock, I was sort of expecting it to be just nonstop praise and adulation, but you really go into some of the messy realities of what life was like.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to show we continued on in the production of this project, more and more people. My stepmother, primarily, really, she was the prime mover. Susan, my dad's widow, really was emphatic about me including my own perspective, my own relationship to Spock and my dad. Because the feeling was, and more people supported on that, the feeling was it would make the project more unique if I could kind of tell my own story, add my own voice. Otherwise, there's so many great documentary filmmakers, around. They could easily do a documentary on Mr. Spock and Leonard Nimoy. But adding my perspective made it slightly different and gave it a different perspective on what it was like being in a celebrity family and dealing, being the son of somebody who had become an iconic figure and was very much in demand by the public. We couldn't go out in public really without Dad being mobbed and having to share him with the public. And it's very challenging. I mean, we had a lot of typical issues together, being fathers and sons. We all have issues together. Ours was a little more magnified by the fact that my dad had created this iconic character. So we do explore some of that to a certain degree, but I do it because we ended up in a good place, my dad and I, during the end of his life. We were very close, and I just thought it was a part of the story that was worth telling.
Right. I don't know if you've seen William Shatner's Captain's documentary, but that's something that really sticks with me from that, is that it seems like everyone who was on Star Trek kind of had their family life suffer enormously because it was just so all-consuming being on those shows.
Yeah, I mean, Kate Mulgrew talks about that extensively. That's a tough gig to be away from your family, particularly when you're a mom, with young kids, for 12 to 14 hours a day, 5 days a week, and then making appearances and doing press and promotional stuff on the side on the weekends. Very, very challenging for a family to get by. My mother had to hold down the fort without my dad around, and my sister and I gave my mother a run for her money. I can tell you that. It's definitely, you do make sacrifices as a family. You do. I would do it again in a second because I think it was worthwhile. And the key for me is that my father really turned things around at the end of his life. The third act of his life, it was about family. I mean, he had done what he needed to do. He was very happy with where, what he had accomplished in his life. And he had grandchildren now at that point, and he really made family a priority in his life, which I think was just a wonderful way to bookend the whole experience, the whole journey.
Yeah. I mean, it was surprising to me watching this film to learn that he had been such a heavy drinker and a heavy smoker. I mean, I know that this is naive, but I guess, I'm like, that's not logical. It's just kind of silly, but you sort of can't help identifying the actor with the character.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's identifying the actor with the character is why my dad wrote an autobiography entitled I Am Not Spock, because people were just confusing him all the time. I mean, mothers were introducing dad in an airport to their children as Mr. Spock, and the kid would look at him and say, What are you talking about? Spock's got ears. Spock's got bangs. Spock's got a uniform. This guy ain't Spock. This is some schmo in the airport. They didn't get it. And he was so, closely identified with that character that he was trying to explain, he mistitled the book, really. He's confessed this repeatedly, that he didn't mean to distance himself from the character, didn't mean to diss the character. He was just trying to let people know, my name is Leonard Nimoy and I do not come from Vulcan. Dad had his, this is the way he decompressed. We talked about this a lot. I mean, a lot of people smoked and drank, to deal with the pressure. Wasn't that unusual, really. It was just kind of the norm for us. It wasn't until later on that he started to realize it was how much of an effect these things were having on his life and decided to make a change in his life, thankfully for the rest of the family, frankly. But we talk about all this, and he talks about all this. Again, this is something that I would not even have delved into had he himself not come out openly to discuss this in that interview that he does with Bill Shatner.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned the book, I Am Not Spock, because I just sort of heard, growing up, I just sort of heard that he had written this book, and I think there was just sort of a sense among people that he had been trying to disavow the character. But as I understand it now, he meant the title much more in a sort of like wry, joking way, and people didn't really get that, or a lot of people, I guess.
Well, he meant it literally. He meant that he was trying to educate some people in the public to understand that that there's two personalities basically that we're dealing with here, and he's an actor and he's capable of other roles as well. But there was a lot of, it was just misinterpreted. A lot of people saw the title and didn't read the book. The problem was that this is, the mid 1970s, and there was a lot of Star Trek was in syndication, and the fan base was expanding, and people wanted more Star Trek. And they thought the reason why they were not getting more Star Trek, either a new series or feature film or whatever, they thought they weren't getting it because Leonard Nimoy didn't want to play Spock anymore. And the fans reacted negatively. Dad told me he got a lot of angry fan mail, a lot of really, really heavy anger coming, directed towards him, which didn't really dissipate until the first feature came out in 1980 or so. So, and for the rest of his career, Dad was explaining, again, why he really made a mistake in titling the book that way.
Yeah. I mean, just as an example of fans not having boundaries, in Shatner's book, there's this anecdote that sticks out in my mind where at one of Leonard's divorce hearings, a judge asked him for an autograph.
Yeah, that's probably, that I don't recall. It's possible. It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, there was a lot of, there was a lot of craziness. People, I mean, I don't know what to say. It's people. People they feel that they want to be close to somebody. They feel they know somebody. They feel a kinship with that celebrity and that role they played, and they want to get close to them. They want to get to know them. They want some of their time and attention. That's perfectly understandable. I mean, one of my idols is Neil Young. In an interview, he said, the disadvantage that we have is that people know us so well. They know our work, and we know nothing about them. And there's so many of them that we don't know anything about, and it's a huge disadvantage. And people just want to, be in Leonard's orbit. So this is what we talk about in the film a lot, about my struggle trying to get my dad's attention when there's such a huge demand for him from the fan base.
Right, and there's a part where he says to you that he always felt like he didn't measure up to his father, who was a barber, and he says, if I feel that way about trying to measure up to my father, the barber, I can't even imagine how you feel trying to measure up to this pop culture icon. Yeah,
well, that letter really kind of says a lot of what I had to deal with. It's a very challenging situation for a kid to be in. I mean, one of the problems that I don't really go into in much detail in the film, but So the problem is that, you're in this family and there's all this heat on the family. There's all this, sun shining. There's all this attention. And you're in it. You're just kind of bathing in this warmth and this glow. But it's not you. It's not me. It's him. He created it. This is who he wants to be. This is who he is. So the real challenge is to find out who I am and break away from that and have an understanding that, I'm just that, that we're separate people and I have to create my own identity. And it takes, it takes a lot to really focus on doing what I wanted to do and pursuing something I wanted to do, which was to do almost anything that he couldn't do, which was almost nothing. Leonard could do just about everything. But that's really why I went to, which was another motivating factor for me to go to college and go to law school, frankly, because it was something that Leonard was not, inclined to do. And I felt a real sense of pride that I could create my own identity apart from him.
Right. So you went to law school and then you were in sort of a music entertainment sort of law?
Yeah, I was in a law firm for 3 years and then spent 4 years in various capacities in the music industry and working for mostly for subsidiary record companies under Capital EMI at the time. And it was fun for a while. It was great. I got to meet David Bowie twice because he was on the EMI label. That was probably the high point of practicing law for a corporation, was meeting David Bowie. And because of that, I wanted to do something more creative and more interesting. And that's when I decided to get out.
Right. So then you decided to become a director, a TV director.
Yes, I went to an acting class. Jeff Corey was my father's acting instructor in the early days. My dad took over that class and was teaching acting as a way to make ends meet before Star Trek. He took over for Jeff Corey, and Jeff was a good friend of the family's, and he invited me around that time, right around 1990, to come out to his studio to watch him work. And I was just completely overwhelmed with emotion by what was happening in that acting class. And I stayed with him off and on for almost 2 years. And really, but it was just that first moment, I just realized this is so much more interesting than what I am doing. And I really wanted to, I wanted to be an actor's director. I was in that class to learn the craft of acting and to see how Jeff helped young actors with performance issues. And it was very inspiring. I told my dad what had happened. He was completely empathetic because Jeff changed his life as an actor, really helped him develop his craft. And then I started taking night courses. And then, my dad took me under his wing and was teaching me everything. And I'm really indebted to him. I got a lot of really interesting, introspective stuff from my dad's experience, both acting and directing, having directed the Star Trek features. So, and 3 Men and a Baby. So I was very fortunate that I could make that career change.
Right. And you got started directing Star Trek Next Generation, right?
That is correct. Next Generation, 2 episodes. Yep. That was interesting.
I mean, so how did that come about?
Well, my first job was really, I shadowed Nick Meyer, who was directing Star Trek VI. Dad was executive producing that feature, and he asked Nick to hire me as an assistant so that I could see what it was like to make a feature film. And Nick did, much to my, complete joy and good luck, because I learned a lot watching Nick and watching the various people who worked, the producers and the cinematographer, production designers, wardrobe. I mean, I really got a sense of how these things come together. But when Star Trek VI wrapped, Dad suggested that I go talk to Rick Berman, who was executive producing The Next Generation at the time. And I went to Rick and I asked him if I could just observe, really, and follow some of his directors around. They have a number of different directors during the course of a season directing different episodes. And Rick, again, to my good luck, said, yeah, sure. And I was on watching them watching directors on The Next Generation for an entire season, getting to know the show, getting to know the crew, getting to know the cast. And then finally, Rick felt confident that I had learned enough from them that he gave me a job.
And so what was that like, actually directing episodes of Star Trek?
Well, it was a great privilege because I was a huge fan of The Next Generation and I loved the cast. But it's very challenging work. I mean, you don't really know what you're doing until you're in it, and I didn't know what I was doing. It took a while for me to really get accustomed to the life of a TV director is all about, what's involved. It's very challenging. It's very difficult work. It's very demanding work. It takes a lot of preparation. It takes a lot of patience. It takes long, long hours. You finish late at night and start early in the morning. You're under a lot of stress because it's about beat the clock, about trying to get the work done, the work that is required of you for the day within the time allotted. And it's the fastest 12 to 14 hour day I've ever had in my life. I mean, the time just flies because you have to really keep moving. But it was a great educational experience, and it really helped launch me in the rest of my directing career, which lasted which I did for about 10 seasons, 45 hours of 1 hour dramas. So it was fun. It was good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, earlier you mentioned you were a fan of The Outer Limits, and I know you directed an episode or two of The Outer Limits, right?
Yeah, that also was early in the directing assignments that I got. They were going to reboot the series on Showtime, and my dad had been in the series as a supporting role in one of my favorite episodes, I, Robot, which I watched as a kid. And they were at the time only hiring Canadian directors because it was a Canadian content show. They get all kinds of tax benefits and credits if they hire primarily Canadian cast and crew, or just crew and production personnel, and cast as well. And Dad said, well, here's what I suggest. Go to them, go to the producers. They were here based in LA, and tell them that I'm willing to participate in that episode, and we can remake that episode, and if they will attach you as director. And that's what we pitched to them, and that's exactly what they did. And I think it was a very good experience for me. I really kind of came into my own as a director. I was very much more confident then. It was great working with Dad. He had a lot of inventive ideas. I think we turned out a really, really strong episode, and it was very important for me. It helped me get an agent and a lot of other directing assignments. So it was a big turning point for me.
Was that intimidating at all, directing him?
Yeah, directing Dad could be sometimes intimidating. But not really. I mean, mostly it was collaborative. I mean, the challenge we had was that he had just finished directing a pilot episode of another TV show, and they had just wrapped the week before he got to us in Vancouver. So it was a very challenging pilot episode that he had directed. So he was pretty beat up by that and needed a couple of days to recover. But once the ball got rolling on our episode, it was a real collaborative effort. He was very helpful to me, very, very respectful of me. He would make suggestions, but, never out loud in front of the cast and crew. We would, during setups, while the crew was working, he would take me aside and whisper stuff to me, which was fantastic. Just a great learning experience. So I was very lucky to have him.
Right. And so you mentioned you directed these 45 TV episodes, and then your career kind of came to an end. You talk about this in your memoir, My Incredibly Wonderful, Miserable Life. Do you want to just say a little bit about what happened at this point?
Well, yeah, I kind of crashed and burned a little bit, and I kind of had to readjust and take some time off, deal with some family issues, deal with some substance abuse issues. I had to focus on, my marriage was failing. I had to, take some action regarding that. And that marriage ended during that period of time. It was just a very rough time for me. And, I needed to take time out and start repairing some of my personal relationships and working on myself in recovery, frankly. And then I started teaching at the Film Academy, New York Film Academy. He had a huge presence out in Burbank, and I applied for a job and started teaching there full time for many years, and was very satisfied doing that. It was just a better balance for me, and just just much better for me to be doing, and which I have been continuing to do. I love teaching, and I was continuing that up until just the last couple of years when I took the time off to work on the Boston documentary with my dad, and then For the Love of Spock.
Right. In the first chapter of your memoir, it's really funny because you're meeting with an agent and you're telling him that you want to write a memoir, and he's getting dollar signs in his eyes, and he's like, "We can call it Son of Spock. This is going to be great." And you tell him, "No, I want to write a different kind of memoir." And you say his face just kind of falls.
Well, yeah, he thought it was going to be a tell-all book or something. I don't know what he thought. It was, he didn't know I was a writer. He thought we were going to hire somebody to write this book with me, and I was going to tell the story of the trials and tribulations of being the son of Leonard Nimoy or something. I'm not. That's kind of where he thought it was leading to. When I explained to him that I'd been writing for a number of years and I have enough material for a book, and I've been in writing classes, and I always wanted to publish something, his interest level dropped dramatically to the point where he was no longer returning my phone calls.
So, I mean, when you publish this book, which is, it focuses on your substance abuse and divorce and your family life and things, what sort of reactions did you get from people to it?
Well, not much, because I think probably 6 people bought the book, so there wasn't much to say. I mean, there were a couple of really good reviews, which I appreciated, but there wasn't a whole lot of feedback about the book. It's interesting, when we had our Kickstarter campaign last year to raise money for the Love of Spock, somebody commented during the course of the campaign that she was willing to contribute to the campaign, but she wasn't sure that Adam Nimoy was the right guy to be making this movie, because she had read My Incredibly Wonderful Miserable Life, and I do talk about a lot of the trouble I was having with my dad at the time, and she loved Spock and Leonard Nimoy and didn't want somebody detracting from that. And I had to write her back to say that book was written at a time when I was in an estrangement period from my dad, but a lot had happened since then. That book was published in 2008, just about the time that my dad and I were starting to reconcile, and I really appreciated that comment from her, but that my dad and I had a very loving and connected relationship the last 4 or 5 years of his life, and I felt like I was going to do justice to our relationship by being the guy to make the film for the Love of Spock. So I had that kind of reaction, but not a whole lot. I mean, most people have simply not seen the book.
Yeah. Well, actually, I bought it and read it this past week, so I guess now there are 7 people who have read it.
7 people. Yeah, thank you so much.
But I couldn't put it down. I really enjoyed it, and the chapters that are the typical conversation with my teenage daughter chapters. My girlfriend and I were reading those together, and I just thought they were hilarious.
That's so kind of you. Thank you.
Okay, so talk about For the Love of Spock. It's out. It's coming out soon. I guess people have started watching it, right? What kind of reactions are you getting to it so far?
Well, people seem to like it. I mean, the general reaction is very positive, and then all over the place. People say they leave wanting more, which is good, and some people say it's too long, take 10 more minutes out of it. So it's really across the board. We have a wide range of reactions. The press has been very good to us. We screened it at the Montreal Film Festival a few weeks ago, and we received the Audience Award for Best Documentary. I love watching the film with a new audience because there's people are really reacting to it. There's a lot of great stuff in it. I think I'm really proud of the work we did, and people seem to be responding to it. I think we did we had a very good a group of people producing this film, and we put a lot of thought, a lot of effort into it, a lot of editorial work. We had a lot of help, by people contributing stuff, the studios and people contributing music and film clips, and I think people are satisfied with the job and surprised, occasionally with the job we've done. So again, the press has been very positive towards us. So I can't, be more than, I can't be any more happy with the response we've been getting.
I mean, do you want to say a little bit more about who appears in the movie and sort of who helped, get it done?
Yeah, well, the movie is, we have over 30 new interviews for this film, which we conducted over the course of 4 or 5 months. We have the original cast members, the still surviving original cast members, Bill and Nichelle and Walter and George. We have the new cast members in the new J.J. Abrams incarnation of Star Trek. We have that. We went up to Vancouver, and they were very welcoming to us, and we were able to interview just about everybody on the new Starship Enterprise. We have Nick Meyer, who is responsible for directing and writing Star Trek II, which really got the whole film franchise back on track. and was and directed Star Trek 6 and co-wrote Star Trek 4 and is involved with the new Star Trek series coming out. We had J.J. Abrams, a key player in reinvigorating Star Trek. So we have scientists who are inspired by Spock from JPL. Neil deGrasse Tyson we interviewed. There's a lot of people who really stepped up and were very interested in supporting us in this project.
So toward the end of the film, it shows you kind of starting to go to Star Trek conventions. Kind of what's that like, attending a Star Trek convention as the son of Leonard Nimoy?
Well, now, I mean, I didn't, the Vegas convention that I attended last year that we filmed was really the first major convention that I attended on my own. I mean, I went to the Chicago convention that my dad was at. I think this was 2012 when he bid them goodbye. It was his last convention appearance. The whole family was there. But other than that, I would not go to a convention. It was just not for me. It was I just didn't feel I wanted to be noticed there. I didn't want to be there as Leonard Nimoy's son. Again, it's kind of an identity issue, I guess. I just felt more comfortable in my own skin if I'm not always identified with my dad. But now that we have created this film, and now that I'm contributing something to Star Trek, liturgy, the lore, the phenomenon, my own contribution, I feel like I've earned my place at the table a little bit, and I'm much more comfortable showing up at the conventions to talk about the film, to promote the film, to talk about my dad and the experience of growing up with Spock, because that's really what the film is about. So now it's and people are so happy to have me there. I mean, they just are welcoming and warm. And last year was wonderful because we were still adjusting to a world without Leonard Nimoy, and it was nice to see a lot of other people who were also mourning the loss of my dad. It was a real collective kind of experience, and it was very heartwarming and very comforting to me.
Do any particular people or stories or anything stand out in your mind of people talking about what he meant to them?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple, but mostly it's the cast that we interviewed up in Vancouver of Star Trek. We're absolutely uniformly emphatic that my dad participating in this new incarnation of Star Trek with the first film, Trek '09, and then Into Darkness, really gave them a sense that they were continuing a tradition and not just some spin-off. They really felt connected, that my dad's presence really helped them feel that they were continuing on this tradition, that they had been really given the torch. There was a passing of this kind of spirituality that my dad and that Spock brought to the whole project. And they told me one after another that spirit and that energy was still with them as the crew, as the cast, while they were making Star Trek Beyond. And that just kind of blew my mind. It's like, wow, he had that kind of impact on people where he's still resonating, even though he's gone. He's still very much around. And they, and everybody on the new cast wanted to make that clear to me, that he's still very present among them all and inspiring them to do great work.
Yeah. Well, we've mentioned William Shatner's book a couple of times. It's called Leonard, My 50-Year Friendship with a Remarkable Man. Have you read that? Do you have any thoughts about that book?
Yeah, I like it. I mean, it's kind of a loving, a portrait of my dad, and reverential about their relationship. And I like it. It's also honest, as in a lot of areas. It touches on some of the conflict and controversy that they dealt with together. My dad and Bill had a very complicated relationship. A lot of ups and downs, but they were, at times they were estranged, and at times they were very close. So I think it's a fairly interesting and accurate portrayal of where they were at. And Bill loved my dad and mourns his loss as much as, the rest of us, frankly. That's my feeling when I talk to Bill. And I just think it's a positive point of view.
Yeah. No, I really enjoyed it. I just read it last night. And one other anecdote from it that I'd never heard before that really sticks in my mind is that Leonard meets President Obama. This is before he becomes president. He's running for president at a fundraiser, and Obama gives him the Vulcan salute. And Leonard replies, "It would be logical if you became president." And I just really like that. It just says how, it's just another example of what a impact, what a wide-ranging impact he had.
Well, yeah. I mean, when the President of the United States issues a press release on the passing of Leonard Nimoy about his love of Spock, that's a pretty powerful statement of the impact of Leonard Nimoy. Absolutely.
Yeah. Another thing from your memoir that I thought was pretty funny is there's a part where you're working as a substitute teacher, and a student asks if you're related to Leonard Nimoy, and you say, "How do you know Leonard Nimoy?" And he says, "Well, because he's on The Simpsons," and that's how he knows. That's how he knows of him.
Yeah. First of all, the kid says to me, "Are you his brother?" Which I loved. Yeah, before I was teaching at the Film Academy, I needed a job, and my first job in recovery was substitute teaching for the Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District, and I was in a science class, oddly enough, and that's when that kid came up to me and asked me about Leonard Nimoy and told me that he was a big fan of Leonard in The Simpsons. So I thought that was amusing because you never hear that. It's always about Spock.
Yeah, and it just says like how young people are maybe going to experience him differently than other people. It's funny. I heard he said that people used to come up to him and say, "Oh, my kids are big fans of yours," and that later people would come up and say, "Oh, my grandparents are such big fans of yours."
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing how multi-generational it is, and this stuff just keeps going. It keeps getting picked up in popular culture. Star Trek, on and on. We talk about this in the film. Big Bang Theory is a hugely successful popular show now, but they keep riffing off of Star Trek and Spock. So these are the kind of things that just keep him very much a part of the public consciousness. I mean, Spock is around, and he will continue to be around, and hopefully entertain and inspire people for generations to come, because he just seems to be somebody that the character just resonates with people across generational lines, across the globe. And it's such a powerful thing. And my dad was never jaded by that realization. I mean, he's been dealing with that, for almost, he had been for almost 50 years, dealing with the immense popularity of Spock. But he was always amazed by the extent, the people who come from faraway places knowing who he was. That always thrilled him. And in fact, when we started to make the documentary, he was doing some research, and he Googled Spock's ears and came back with 150,000 websites that referenced those famous ears. And he was amused by that. It's like it was never old news to him, which I thought was really something that I admired.
Yeah, no, that's so great. Okay, so unfortunately, we're pretty much out of time. So, Adam, do you have any other projects you want to mention? Any final words, anything like that?
Well, I'm hoping to, and I am working with NASA on a Mars project. That's my next documentary. I want to do something about the Mars mission. NASA's very heavily invested in Star Trek. They love Star Trek. I'm invited to a lot of NASA and JPL related events. We interviewed JPL NASA scientists who are inspired by Spock. And there's so much now going on to get ready for this mission to Mars, manned mission, they hope in the 2030s, that I've been talking with them about making a documentary related to all these different aspects, all these components, all these moving parts that have to come together to make that mission possible.
All right, yeah, that sounds great. So if people want to follow you and sort of keep an eye out for when that documentary maybe comes out, do you have a website or Twitter? Or?
fortheloveofspock.com. And they'll find us. And we are going to be in theaters on the 9th of September, and we are going to be on demand through iTunes. We're there now. You can order the film now. It'll be released on the 9th. And that is the way to find out what we're doing.
All right, great. Yeah, so it's a great documentary. Everyone go check it out. And so we've been speaking with Adam Nimoy. So Adam, thank you so much for joining us.
David, thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate it.
And that was our interview. So big thanks again to Adam Nimoy for joining us on the show. Big thanks as well to everyone who's given us 5 stars on iTunes, including this new one from a listener whose name I'm not quite sure how to pronounce. It's spelled Qpoiouy. And the review says, "Favorite podcast. Not sure why I love this so much. Reminds me of when I was a kid and read classic sci-fi and played Dungeons & Dragons. I guess because David Barr Kirtley is such a great interviewer, and he's a writer, so he asks intuitive questions. I'm interested in the difference between hard and soft sci-fi, and I love hearing stories about people like me being successful. Also, it's interesting to see how sci-fi has gone slightly mainstream. In the late 1970s and 1980s, not everyone had turned into a geek yet. So big thanks again for that great review. And of course a special thank you to Epsilon, who just signed up this week to support us on Patreon. Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time or fixed monthly contribution, you can do that via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. Alright, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.